St. Paul says, rejoice always, pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances, do not quench the Spirit, do not despise the words of prophets, but test everything, hold fast to what is good, abstain from every form of evil. Such is Paul's closing advice for the Christian living offered to the Thessalonians who are eagerly anticipating the second coming of Christ. And such is Paul's advice to you and me, who on this third week of Advent are ourselves eagerly anticipating the coming of Christ at Christmas. And each of these tightly packed phrases, rejoice always, pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances, are themselves fertile ground for an entire sermon. But fear not, brothers and sisters, I've chosen just one of them to focus on for our time this morning. I want to focus on this line, one that seems particularly appropriate in this moment that we're living in. That line is this: hold fast to what is good. What does Paul mean when he tells us to hold fast to what is good? It's one of those lines that, when lifted out of theological context, could mean just about anything you want it to. It's a line, I imagine, emblazoned on some vacuous, inspirational poster in a football locker room somewhere. What does Paul mean, and what does he not mean when he says, hold fast to what is good? I can't, of course, offer a definitive answer, but I want to at least gesture towards what I think might be answers, to share two stories, vignettes really, that have helped me in this Advent season so far to see what I think this phrase means, to hold fast to what is good, what it means and what it does not. So the first story, the first vignette, is a letter, and the second is a poem. So first, the letter. It's a letter by Vincent van Gogh, who has been, as several of you know, one of my kind of side hobby obsessions of my adult life. Everybody knows his paintings, but not everybody knows that he was also a voluminous writer of letters, the overwhelming majority of which were addressed to his younger brother Theo, who, in addition to being his brother, was also Vincent's best friend and patron. Vincent and Theo wrote letters back and forth weekly, often daily, for basically their entire adult life, about family drama, about art, about nature, faith, failure, vocation, women, about everything. And in one of my favorite letters, Vincent writes this line to his brother Theo. He says, Find things beautiful as much as you can. Most people find too little beautiful. Find things beautiful as much as you can. Most people find too little beautiful. For most of my life, my assumption has been that we walk around in an ordinary world, and every once in a while we are interrupted by something beautiful, like an unexpected sunset, or a baby's first steps, or a Texas snowfall. Or that we go about our normal lives and are occasionally interrupted by something good, like a promotion at work, by falling in love, or by winning a trophy. And what Van Gogh has helped me understand is that seeing goodness and beauty in the world is actually a discipline of seeing. The goodness and the beauty are always there. You just have to have the eyes to see it. You have to train your eyes to see it. And also, that's what is beautiful. It's not just the big, huge things. It is perhaps especially the small things. Van Gogh, for example, we see in his paintings, was obsessed with small things, obsessed with wheat fields and sunflowers. And through those paintings, he helped us to see how those things have been beautiful to us all along. We just weren't paying attention. So first, perhaps holding fast to what is good has something to do with simply paying better attention. And this cuts against what I take to be one bad interpretation of what it means to hold fast to what is good. That being that in our Christian lives, we ought to focus less on that which is quote unquote material and temporary, and that we should give priority instead to that which is quote spiritual and eternal. We hear such advice all the time in the Christian world. Such so-called wisdom tends to be very much in vogue during the holiday season, where Christians with superiority complex run amok, pontificating about Christmas, how Christmas needs to be less materialistic. The irony is that advice is that the miracle at the very heart of Christmas is one that is precisely material, one that is precisely temporal, and very much in this world. That is, the coming of Christ and the incarnation is about how the God of the universe took on material flesh at a particular time in history, in a trough in a Bethlehem barn surrounded by animals. What it means to hold fast to what is good, then must, if anything, encourage us to turn our attention more to the material world around us, not less. Advent, in other words, is not about spiritualizing everything into ethereal, disembodied wisdom, or awaiting a day when our spirits get to float up into the clouds. It's about us looking for the concrete, touchable ways that God and God's heaven come crashing into earth even now. That's how Van Gogh has been helpful for me in this Advent season. So second, a poem. This is a poem by a man named Christian Wiman. Wiman, whom I've read to you before on multiple occasions. He is one of the most well-respected living American poets. He grew up in West Texas. He was the editor of Poetry magazine for over a decade, and he currently teaches at Yale. And he also has a rare and incurable cancer. He was diagnosed with it about 15 years ago, about the same time that he got married and about the same time that he became a Christian. And he wrote this poem that I'm going to read to you about a moment lying in his bed, sick unto death, and looking out his window at a tree filled with birds, and then watching the birds take off from the tree all at once. That's the whole poem. And I'm going to put it on the screen for you so you can follow along. The poem is called From a Window. Incurable and unbelieving in any truth but the truth of grieving, I saw a tree inside a tree rise kaleidoscopically as if the leaves had livelier ghosts. I pressed my face as close to the pain as I could get to watch that fitful, fluent spirit that seemed a single being undefined or countless beings of one mind haul its strange cohesion beyond the limits of my vision over the house heavenwards. Of course, I knew those leaves were birds. Of course, that old tree stood exactly as it had and would, but why should it seem fuller now? And though a man's mind might endow even a tree with some excess of life to which a man seems witness, that life is not the life of men. And that is where the joy came in. What's helpful to me about this poem is that it shows how what is good is not exclusively available to those who are happy. Wiman uses the word joy. I've heard him talk about this poem, and he said that he sat down to write a poem about despair. That's how it starts, incurable and unbelieving. And given the circumstances of his life, he had every right to be despairing. But then there, in that bitter state, he was surprised by a moment that exploded into joy, noticing the life to which those birds gave witness is not the life of men. I wonder if this has been true to your experience, if you've ever been surprised by something good in the midst of a time that was overwhelmingly bad. See, the joy of Wiman's poem is distinctly not the happiness of a promotion or that of your child's first steps. It's the joy of a soccer match played in the slums, of the peculiarly gut-leaping kind of laughter that often comes up when you're at a funeral, of the loving lick of a dog who doesn't know and doesn't care that you had a terrible day. It's the joy described in the Beatitudes, actually, in which one translation of it I particularly like, instead of saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," says, "How blissful the destitute, abject in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of the heavens." What is good for Wyman is not merely the intensification of a good feeling. It's that which is good that exists next to the bad and refuses to be extinguished by the bad, which means, and this is the important part, it is a joy and goodness that is available to all. And this, I think, cuts against another bad interpretation of what someone might be tempted to think hold fast to what is good means. That being the just be an optimist interpretation of that phrase. As in, life might have you down, but really, don't we all have so much to be thankful for? Look on the bright side. Isn't the cup half full when you really think about it? The problem with such escapist advice is that it tends to only work for the privileged. It tends to leave out those whose suffering is genuine and beyond their control. Telling us to hold fast to what is good is not part of St. Paul's philosophy of self-improvement therapy. Wyman's poem is helpful because it shows that there is a difference between what is deeply good and having a good attitude. A difference between joy and happiness, which is that joy is something that can be experienced amidst suffering, while happiness is not. Perhaps holding fast to what is good doesn't necessitate that we deny that which is bad in our lives. Perhaps it's about learning to see one in the midst of the other. This, I don't need to tell you, feels particularly apt this year. And perhaps especially helpful for these weeks ahead. Things are bad. They have never been so bad for so many people at the same time. But remember, that doesn't make good impossible. What is good, I dare say, is still inevitable this Christmas season. This is God's good world, after all. It is broken, yes, but it is still deep down and fundamentally good. So hold fast. Amen.